When I was a child, my family lived in a house that no one ever seemed to want to talk about. To most, it was just another old home on the block. But to me, it was something different. It was something darker. The house had always given off an eerie feeling. It was one of those old Victorian-style houses with peeling paint and weathered windows that groaned in the wind. It was too big for just our family of 4. But we moved in when I was only 6 years old, drawn to its character, its spacious rooms, and its grand staircase that led to the second floor. It was a dream home, at least that's what my parents thought. But as time went on, I began to notice strange things happening, things that couldn't be easily explained. It started with small, insignificant occurrences that I would have dismissed if I hadn't experienced them myself. The house was always colder than it should have been, even in the dead of summer. The air seemed thick, like something was pressing down on you, making it harder to breathe. The floorboards would creak and groan at all hours of the night, even though no one was walking on them. I could never quite shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. But the worst part was the whispers. It started when I was about 7 years old. At night, when everything was still and the world outside was quiet, I would hear soft whispers coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a side effect of being alone in the dark. But the whispers never stopped. They were always there, low and unintelligible, like a conversation that was happening just out of reach. It was my little brother, Jake, who first noticed something was wrong. He was only 4 at the time, but his perceptiveness was uncanny. One night, while we were both lying in our beds, he suddenly sat up, his eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling. I turned to him, confused. "Hear what?" "The man," he said, pointing toward the hallway. "The man in the shadows." I looked toward the dark hallway, but there was nothing there. "Jake, there's no one there," I reassured him, though my voice was laced with doubt. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, the air thick with something I couldn't name. But Jake wasn't convinced. For weeks, he insisted that there was a man living in the shadows of our house. He would point to the corners of the rooms, his small finger trembling, and say, "He's watching us." My parents dismissed it as childish imagination. "He's just seeing things," they would say, patting Jake on the head as if it were all a phase. But I wasn't so sure. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, until one night, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, a low, guttural voice that came from behind the walls. I could barely make out the words, but they sounded like a warning, something I couldn't quite understand. "Leave, before it's too late." I didn't tell anyone about it, not at first. I didn't want to sound crazy, and part of me still hoped it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But every night, the whispers continued, growing more desperate, more insistent, and the shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to move, as if they were alive, shifting with every flicker of light. Things began to get worse after that. My parents started arguing more, their voices rising in frustration whenever they were home. It wasn't long before I realized that the house was having an effect on them. My mother, once a lively and vibrant woman, grew pale and withdrawn. My father became irritable, snapping at us for no reason. They both seemed different, like they were losing themselves in the house, consumed by something dark and malevolent. One night, when I was 10, I decided to explore the house. I needed to understand what was happening, to find some explanation for the strange events that had been unfolding. I started in the attic, where the house seemed the most alive. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended, the air growing colder with each step. The attic was dusty and forgotten, filled with old furniture and boxes of things my parents never bothered to sort through. As I dug through the boxes, searching for anything that might explain the unsettling atmosphere of the house, I stumbled upon something strange, an old, leather-bound journal. It was hidden beneath a pile of yellowed newspapers, as if someone had tried to bury it. The journal belonged to a man named Charles Hawthorne. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I flipped open the first page, and what I read made my stomach turn. The entries were written in an elegant but shaky hand. The first few pages were filled with mundane details about daily life, but as I turned the pages, the tone began to change. The writing grew more erratic, the words more desperate. Charles Hawthorne described hearing voices in the walls, seeing shadows move when no one was around. And then, the entries became darker, more disturbing. "I can't escape them," one entry read. "The voices are getting louder. They want me to stay. They don't want me to leave." Another entry described a strange ritual, one that Charles had participated in. It was a ceremony meant to bind him to the house, to ensure that his soul would remain there forever. According to the journal, he had been warned that the house had a dark history, one that began long before he ever moved in. The final entry was chilling. "They are coming for me now. I can feel them in the walls, in the floors. They won't let me go. They never will." The journal stopped there, but the words echoed in my mind. I had to know more. I had to uncover the truth about Charles Hawthorne and what had happened in that house. But I never got the chance to do that. As I was about to put the journal back, a cold gust of wind swept through the attic, slamming the window shut. The room went dark, the shadows in the corners shifting, stretching toward me. I could feel the presence in the room, something ancient and angry, its eyes fixed on me. The whispers started again, louder now, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. "Leave! Leave now!" I ran down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the bottom, I found my parents standing at the door, their faces pale and drawn. They didn't speak, but the look in their eyes said everything. They knew. They had known all along. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The whispers followed me, the presence in the walls never truly leaving. The house. It had claimed us just like it had claimed Charles Hawthorne. And I feared that no matter how hard we tried to leave, we would never escape it. It was the night after I found the journal that things truly began to unravel. The whispers had intensified, becoming deafening, like 1,000 voices clamoring for attention. It felt as if the house itself was alive, breathing, watching, waiting. But now something had changed. It wasn't just a presence in the shadows anymore. It was like the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating us. I tried to tell my parents about the journal. I told them what I had read, about Charles Hawthorne and the ritual he had performed to bind himself to the house. But my words were met with disbelief. My father, who had always been the logical one, chalked it up to a child's imagination running wild. My mother, pale and drawn, simply stared at me blankly, as though she were lost in her own thoughts. She didn't seem to hear me, and for the first time, I wondered if the house was taking its toll on her too. It didn't take long for me to realize that the house had more power than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't just a house, it was a prison for anyone who dared to live within its walls. And now we were its newest inmates. The days following my discovery were filled with strange occurrences. Shadows moved on their own, creeping across the walls, shifting as if alive. Objects would fall from shelves, sometimes right in front of us, with no explanation. My brother Jake started talking to people who weren't there, laughing and having conversations with invisible figures. At first, I thought it was just his overactive imagination, but there was something different in his eyes. Something empty. One evening, after my parents had gone out for the night, I stayed up in my room, trying to piece together what was happening. The house was eerily quiet, but I could feel it. The same heavy presence that had been there since we moved in. I couldn't escape it. It was in every corner of the house, in every creaking floorboard, in every gust of wind that rattled the windows. Suddenly, I heard a sound, a soft scratching noise, like something dragging across the walls. I froze, straining to listen. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as though something was trying to get through the walls. My heart raced as I stood up and crept toward the source of the noise. It was coming from the hallway, just outside my room. I opened the door slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway was empty, bathed in the pale light of the moon filtering through the windows. But then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, just near the stairs, stood a shadow. A tall, dark figure so solid it seemed almost real. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its shape was distorted, as though it were made of darkness itself, its edges blurred and shifting. My eyes locked onto it, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then it moved. The shadow shifted toward me with a speed that was almost too fast for my mind to process. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest as I pressed my back against it, too afraid to look. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew it wasn't. That thing, whatever it was, had been real, and it had been waiting for me. The next morning, my parents seemed different, as if something had happened overnight. My mother's face was pale, drawn with dark circles under her eyes, and my father had a far-off look in his gaze, as though he were seeing something none of us could. I tried to talk to them about what I had seen, but they only dismissed me as if I were just making up stories. They were too absorbed in their own world to listen, too consumed by whatever dark force was already pulling at them. But I couldn't ignore what I had seen. Something had changed in the house. Something had woken up, and I was terrified of what it wanted from us. It wasn't long before I started noticing more of the house's secrets. The attic, which I had originally thought was a place for old forgotten things, was now a place of unease. I had avoided it ever since that night with the journal, but the house seemed to be calling me back, pulling me toward it, urging me to learn more. One afternoon, when I couldn't stand the oppressive atmosphere any longer, I returned to the attic. I needed answers. I needed to understand why this house was tormenting us. I climbed the stairs again, the floor creaking beneath my weight, and when I reached the top, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of dread. The attic was dark, as if the very air in the room had been suffocated by years of neglect. Dust hung in the air, thick and choking, and the only light came from a small window near the back, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I began to search again, this time with a sense of urgency. I had to find something, anything, that could explain why our lives were spiraling into madness. My fingers brushed over old boxes and forgotten trinkets, but then I came across something that caught my attention. A small wooden chest, tucked away in the farthest corner of the room. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside, there was nothing but an old, rusted key and a small piece of paper. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink smudged as if it had been handled many times before. It was a letter. The handwriting was shaky, written with haste, but it was still legible. It was signed by Charles Hawthorne. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The letter spoke of a hidden door, one that had been sealed off after the ritual that bound Charles to the house. The door led to a room beneath the foundation, a place that had been sealed for a reason. Charles wrote about how he had been warned that the house was cursed, that it had a dark history that no one should ever know. But it was too late. He had already opened the door, and now there was no escaping the darkness that lay within. The letter ended abruptly, the last few words unreadable, as though something had happened to stop Charles from finishing his final thoughts. But one line stood out above all the others. Do not open the door. If you do, it will claim you, just as it claimed me. The room felt colder suddenly, the air thick with dread. I clutched the letter in my hand, my breath shallow, my heart racing. I knew then that the house wasn't just haunted. It was a prison, and we were trapped inside it. Whatever had happened to Charles Hawthorne wasn't just a warning. It was a fate that awaited us all. I heard a noise behind me, a soft scraping sound. Slowly I turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was Jake. His eyes were wide, his face pale, and his lips moved, forming words that I couldn't quite understand. The man in the attic, he says it's time. The darkness in the room seemed to pulse, and I felt a cold hand grip my heart. I had to act. I had to find the door Charles had spoken of before it was too late. But something told me I was already too late. The moment Jake spoke those words, a heavy silence fell over the attic. It felt as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something, waiting for me to act. I wanted to scream, to run, to pull Jake close and lock the door, but my feet felt rooted to the floor, as if the house itself were holding me captive. The man in the attic, he says it's time, Jake repeated, his voice hollow, as though it came from somewhere deep within him. not from his innocent 4-year-old self. His eyes were wide, unfocused, as though he was seeing something beyond the realm of the living. Couldn't look away. I had to understand. I had to know what was happening to my brother, to my family, and to the house that had become our nightmare. I stepped toward him, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to shake the feeling that something was watching us. Something in the dark, something that had always been there. "Jake, what do you mean?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Jake didn't respond. He just stood there, frozen, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. And then, slowly, his eyes drifted toward the farthest corner of the attic, toward the place where I had found the chest, the place where the letter had revealed the existence of the door. I felt a chill run through my spine. The air in the room seemed to grow colder still, as if the temperature had dropped by 10 degrees in an instant. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward us, growing longer, darker, as if they were alive. The attic felt alive, pulsing with a malevolent force that I couldn't understand. A low sound came from beneath the floorboards, a faint scratching noise that seemed to come from far below us, as though something was crawling in the darkness beneath the house. My breath caught in my throat. The house, it was awake. It was alive. I grabbed Jake's hand, pulling him toward the door, but as soon as I reached for the handle, the entire house shuddered. The walls groaned, as though the house itself were trying to expel us, to keep us inside. "No," Jake said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "It's too late. The man says we have to open the door now." I froze, looking down at my little brother. His innocent face now held something more, something ancient and sorrowful. It was as if he knew more than any child his age should have known. It was as if the house had already begun to take him, just as it had taken Charles Hawthorne. The journal's warning echoed in my mind. "Do not open the door. If you do, it will claim you just as it claimed me." But Jake was already walking toward the far wall, moving as if guided by something unseen, his small hand reaching out to the spot where the floorboards were old and worn. I watched in terror as he knelt down and pressed his hand against the wall, just below the attic window. A sudden shift in the air, a cold, unnatural gust, ripped through the attic, rattling the rafters and sending dust swirling. And then a soft click. The floorboards beneath Jake's hand shifted, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a section of the floor began to lift. It was a trapdoor. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on that door, on the darkness beneath it, as the air grew heavy with something old and vile. I could feel it, deep in my bones, the evil that had festered in this house for generations. The house wanted us. It wanted our souls. "Jake, no!" I shouted, rushing to him. But it was too late. He had already lifted the trapdoor, revealing the inky blackness beneath, a void that seemed to swallow all light. Before I could stop him, Jake stepped forward, his tiny feet descending into the dark, and I heard a voice, low, hoarse, and trembling, that came from below. It was a whisper, but it was clear enough for me to hear. "Welcome home." I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest, as the darkness beneath the floor seemed to pulse, like a living thing, hungry and eager. It wasn't just a room. It was a hole, a cavern, a place where light couldn't touch, where time itself seemed to lose all meaning. I grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him back, but he resisted, his small body wriggling in my grasp. "I have to go," he whispered, his voice far too old for a child. "He's waiting for me." I couldn't understand. What had happened to my brother? What was the house doing to him? I pulled him up, away from the open door, my hands trembling. And then I saw it, the shadow at the edge of the trapdoor. A figure, tall and thin, its face obscured by the darkness. Its presence filled the room like a heavy fog, and I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through my skin. The whispers, the voices in the walls, they were louder now, all of them speaking at once, pressing against my ears. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the figure, and in a voice like the rustling of dry leaves, it spoke again. "It's time. You cannot escape what is already inside." The door slammed shut with a deafening crack, and the figure disappeared. The house was closing in on us. Couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to be moving, shifting, pressing against us. My heart hammered in my chest, and I realized that the house had been waiting for us. It wasn't just the past. It wasn't just the history. The house was a living thing, and it wanted to trap us within its walls, just like it had trapped Charles Hawthorne, just like it had trapped every soul that had ever set foot in it. Jake was no longer struggling against me. His body went limp, and his face was blank. Empty. He was gone. My little brother was gone, consumed by the house, just like the others before him. I felt the tears welling in my eyes, but there was no time for grief. There was no time for anything except escape. The house was alive, and it was coming for me. I ran. I ran through the halls, through the darkened rooms, trying to find the door, trying to find the way out. But the house wasn't letting me leave. The doors slammed shut as I approached them. The windows rattled as if they were made of glass. But no matter how hard I pulled, I couldn't break free. The whispers had become screams, filling my mind, suffocating me. I could hear Charles Hawthorne's voice now, echoing from the walls, warning me in his frantic, desperate tone. You can't leave. You'll never leave. The house will claim you too. I could feel it closing in, surrounding me, trapping me in the very place where it had trapped so many before. The weight of it was unbearable. The darkness, the presence, it was everywhere. And then, as I stumbled toward the door, I heard a voice. Jake's voice, soft and distant, but clear. You're not alone. I turned, but there was nothing there, just the oppressive darkness of the hallway. The house was silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. And then, with one final, deafening crash, the walls of the house closed in on me, sealing my fate. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Slow, deliberate, and getting closer. And then, there was nothing. The house had claimed me too.